grateful that it's ever evolving, that it's something that we can really take a personal connection with, and why I feel like the needs and the spirituality of women is something that hasn't fully been utilized in the church. I guess it kind of came about a few years ago. We were living on Oahu, and we had a bishop that was just really hard for the ward, especially the women of the ward, and that was difficult in itself. But the most frustrating part is we were trying to relay that this was not working to upper leaders, to the state presidency. And it's just like we hit a wall at that point. We weren't really being listened to in the ways we felt was coming up with a solution. And we couldn't, there was no contact number for counselors in the LA, for the church. There was no contacts for area authorities. And I just, in my mind, I remember just seeing a pattern of like, I have seen a lot of mistreatment for women, but I don't feel that this is conducive to what Christ taught. And so there's something wrong here. I just remember feeling like there's something wrong here that shouldn't be. And with that, I kind of also felt like, I've not fully ever appreciated the fact that I don't feel as spiritually capable as the men, because I've always had it imprinted on me that they're the ones that are authorized in performing our ordinances and giving us clearance to do certain things. But I've always felt a little bit dependent and not as effective as them. And so I had to really work on myself to overcome that. Yeah. And to kind of learn, what I've learned along the way is that there is a real partnership of the divine and the masculine. And I think it's that the men have their priesthood. I think the women have their own kind of priesthood, but it's the combination of the two that creates a unit that is kind of like the order of the heavens. That is the ultimate priesthood, is the combination of the two. And so while I realize that's not something we embody fully at the church right now, I think that is something we're working towards, and I can kind of sit with that hope and enjoy my journey along the way. And I so appreciate other women like yourself who come on social media and share that kind of vision or visions of their own and what they've learned, because that's not something we had, 10, 15 years ago, Yeah. As much as people, there's problems with social media, there's a lot of wonderful things, and I appreciate the space so much and the opportunity to have communication such as this.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. That's quite the experience and journey. And I think that's one of my favorite parts here is I love seeing the different perspectives and the different experiences and the different things that people are living, right? And so having that opportunity, like you said, of social media providing this space for us all to in a way get to know each other and the different experiences that are going on and the different things that sometimes, are different than just your local community or your local people that you're connecting with. And so, yeah, that's awesome. Well, I know today I was thinking it would be fun since it's Easter weekend. It feels like we should be talking something about Easter for it. And you had this beautiful idea you suggested when we were kind of brainstorming, hey, is this going to work? What would we want to discuss? And I'd love to hear a little bit more of your thoughts. Tell me some more.
It's just one of those things that came to me as I was pondering in my mind this week about Easter. A figure that has become kind of iconic for me and my journey in spirituality is Mary Magdalene. And just the knowledge that Jesus chose her to manifest in his perfected, resurrected body, and chose her to relay that message. And I think it was just kind of divine guidance that caused me to realize that there are ties between the experience that Mary Magdalene had and the experience that Joseph Smith had in the forest when he went in the sacred grove, when he prayed and saw Jesus Christ and Heavenly Father, and as resurrected beings as well as perfect embodied beings. And I don't know if you want me to expand on that.
Yeah, please do. I love that idea. And I think you even just started to paint that, right? Of like two core points here that, traditional Christianity in general, we talk, but especially LDS, we talk and focus a lot on like the resurrected Christ, right? But to have this added part of our specific theology of like, that wasn't the only time the resurrected Christ appeared, that there was this second occurrence that happened to Joseph in the grove. And I'd never quite framed it or thought about it in that way of these two parallel experiences. So I'm super excited to see, what you see in those parallels.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because you have kind of two figures who are not seen at their time and culture as like an authority on, ecclesiastical authority or someone that people looked up to. They are very just these humble. I mean, Mary, as a woman in that culture, wasn't looked as somebody who, I don't know, they're kind of the underdogs, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And Joseph Smith as well was this 14-year-old schoolboy. And they're both in this moment where they're looking at almost kind of a hopeless situation in terms of religion and their worship. And, Mary and the apostles, they have just lost this figure who they relied on for teaching them what faith is and what their connection to God is. And they were relying on to be a savior. And now all of a sudden he's gone, and kind of the devastation of that moment. And then you have Joseph Smith, who is in the devastation of, I have been to all these churches and none of them feel right. And I'm kind of just in this kind of stuck place in my soul where I don't know where to go. And so I feel they're both kind of in a tough spot when they go and have this experience. And they both have a witness that introduces the figure of Christ to them. So with Mary, it's an angel says, he's not here, he's risen, before she is able to see that embodied Christ. And for Joseph, he is introduced to Jesus by the Father. This is my beloved son. And I was kind of stuck on this point for a moment where Joseph, as he went to pray, was overcome by the adversary. We hear that story so many times, that he was overcome and that light broke through the darkness. And I was like, I don't know if there is a parallel to Mary in that situation. But as I was reading through the accounts this week, I believe it was in, let me see. I wrote it down. I wrote the verse down. Maybe I don't have it. Mark 16:19. Mark introduces Mary as the first to see the resurrected Christ, and she was the one who had 7 devils cast out of her. So both Joseph and both Mary had this spiritual example of the power of Christ overcoming the power of Satan. And they had that experience manifest to them before they were actually to physically be in his presence. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah. But at the real big part of it is that both of these experiences changed the way the divine is interacted with. And it was also like a very big point in the plan of salvation for mankind. For Mary, seeing Jesus Christ as a resurrected being, that was the new idea that there's an embodiment after death. And mankind, we're now to partake in the sacrament and to actively every week purify and renew ourselves and to remember him. And the law of Moses was done away with, so that was very much a change in theology and the way we interacted with the divine. And then, of course, with Joseph Smith, that was the start of the restoration and the priesthood coming again to the earth and all the ordinances that followed from there. So they're both kind of, I don't know how to explain that fully, but very key points in the plan of Heavenly Father and his path for his children on earth.
Wow, this is beautiful, Josie. I'm loving these parallels that you're seeing there. Like I said, I've never thought about these. I've never heard this like parallel before. And as you're laying it out, it's like, what a beautiful pattern to see here. And I think you're right of seeing these parallels that are showing up. And it's making me think about one of the things that I have loved about the Easter story for me personally has extra meaning with what you're sharing here, because I've always looked at just kind of the 4-day structure of Christ's death through to the resurrection, because I feel like that's what we tend to talk about a lot, right? And so I've spent time, thinking about that and learning about, particularly in Jewish culture, how significant it was that he rose on the 4th day. And this idea that he had been dead for 3 days, that's typically the period of time that they would wait to see, like, is this person actually dead? Or, is there just like in a coma or something and they're going to wake up again? And that's sort of kind of where my understanding, I could be getting this wrong, but my understanding is like, that's kind of where the ideas of like awake happens too, of like, you're literally waiting to see, is this person going to wake up or are they actually dead? And so after 3 days, that's typically the period of time where they're like, okay, this is done. And I think part of it also has to do with some of the ideas about like the spirit and the body, and that after 3 days, the spirit is like fully left the body. But for up to 3 days, it still kind of lingers, or the presence is still there. And so you can also still kind of connect with or feel that. And so that's part of that celebration. But it's like they're dead after that is kind of the presence. And so this idea that, you know, he is fully dead by this point, and then the resurrection happens, is so beautiful and meaningful to me, in this idea of there are times in our lives where it can feel like, it's over, right? We've been waiting. Okay, all the signs are here. I need to just kind of accept and move on or whatever. And it's like this beautiful message of miracles happen even in that period where it's like it's over. And so hearing what you're describing here in this beautiful parallel between these patterns that Mary and Joseph had, where I see this like parallel experience of like an individual having to go through this process. Like Joseph was growing so much, and I feel like these had to be really powerful individual experiences, even though we talk about, and you just described so well too, like these were pivotal moments for mankind too, and like in God's bigger plan. But if we look at them as individuals, those had to be significant moments for them individually and through their own growth. And so seeing this pattern of like, there's some sort of darkness or like despair or opposition that we feel, whether that's, Joseph being overcome in the grove or Mary having these devils cast out. There's that experience that we go through. And then I love that you painted this image of there's like a guide. There's somebody who comes and introduces the individual to the fullness of Christ and this resurrected being who gets to be there. And I think of the idea that we can be angels for one another, kind of introducing each other to this fullness of who we can be and what's possible for us and what it means to become more like Christ and to further progress on our own individual path and journey to become one day a resurrected full being just like Christ was. And so having that like pattern set up that you just laid out there is like, oh, that's so beautiful to look at it at this individual spiritual journey and to use that almost as a roadmap of like, there are going to be those moments where we are in the darkness part, or before that, where we're just like feeling lost or questioning. Mary, I'm sure, was very close to Christ and felt a lot of that loss, right? And there could have been a lot of despair and personal grief of just like, he's really gone, And so I think sometimes when we're in those moments, it's really easy to question what has gone wrong, or are things going wrong, or everything is falling apart. And so to be able to see like, this is part of the divine pattern. This is how these encounters and experiences happen. And for us individually, it may not be so grand scale as literally seeing the resurrected Jesus Christ. And yet I feel like we still get to have those experiences. We get to have those relationships. We get to have those connections, and we still follow that path or that pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, perfectly said. That is something I thought about as I was comparing these two experiences, is that in their despair, they still showed up. They didn't walk away and just be like, all is lost. Mary showed up at the tomb, wanting to still do her duty, and Joseph showed up at the grove. And I think that's a good message for us, is that even when it doesn't look like there is any point or any answer that we can see ourselves, that we still bring our vulnerabilities forth. And I always kind of wonder if Mary, and I like to think that she did, as she saw the Christ, was kind of quickened to understand all the implications, because I don't know if the full atonement had been taught to them as it has been taught to us, and what it means that Christ being resurrected means that we can also be resurrected. But I hope I tend to think that she understood that, and Joseph as well. He just understanding that Christ has a body, because all these religions, I don't think they were teaching that. And neither of these people were really believed when they first went and presented what had happened, but the fact that they also persisted, and Mary became a teacher in her life, according to scholarly material out there and historians. She moved on and became a teacher. And I just think the example is that we show up with our vulnerable selves, and those experiences that we have, that we continue to share, and it just, for me, it just kind of builds a love of our Savior, as somebody who is a rock and we can stand by and rely on.
Yeah. Well, keep going.
Oh, no.
So I didn't want to interrupt you if you had more you were going to say right there.
No, I kind of wanted to go into something like kind of the masculine and feminine experience, like aside of these experiences, which is something I feel like you're probably more qualified to touch on. But you wanted to share.
Yeah, I was just going to comment off of what you said there, and then let's definitely dive into that, because any chance I get to talk about masculine and feminine stuff, that's my jam. So I love it. But yeah, as you were talking, I think too, I love that you said that this is this pattern, and like showing up in our vulnerabilities, and like they took action, right? It's not like Joseph was waiting at home, like, oh, well, I'm asking, and so God will show up and like give me the answer that I need, right? He was doing that action piece there too. And I love that implication too for Mary of, she went there and was, largely, I think they were both seeking love, seeking truth, seeking light, seeking Christ, and that parallel that we can have of how are we seeking Christ in our own lives? In what ways are we showing up? And that there's room for us to do that in our vulnerability and in our strength. And with that, it also, I loved what you said of this idea that both of these were moments that redefined our experience with the divine. Right. And like what that means for mankind in general, humankind, womankind, right? Whatever people want to say. But the whole idea, that there's this relationship, there's this experience, there's this connection with divinity, and that it is a lot more real, a lot more personal, a lot more tangible than we sometimes give it credit. And that both of these moments, Mary being introduced by the angel to the resurrected Christ, having that parallel with Joseph in the grove, being introduced by God the Father to his son Jesus Christ, like there's that similar pattern and parallel of having this connection to understanding divinity and what that means. And maybe right before we go and talk more about masculine and feminine energy, I'd love to hear your thoughts of like, how do you see that pattern of like our relationship with divinity and our understanding of that, particularly as women, right? Like what's the potential for this next experience that could unfold for us, or how can we learn from this pattern, what that means for our relationship with divinity? Because I feel like we're getting more of these pieces. Christ is saying, hey, there's more than just this physical life you have right now, right? There's a spiritual life, and it doesn't end with death. There is more that comes afterwards, and we get to continue this experience. And then Joseph sort of furthers that and says experiences with the divine are not just for the elite or the special or whoever. They're personal, they're individual. Anyone has that opportunity and ability to connect with Christ and to feel God, to see God. You don't have to be some grand person. And Mary Magdalene, I think, was almost ahead of her time in this way of having, like, it doesn't just have to be if Joseph was representing the uneducated, right, and the everyday person, she's representing, I feel like, in a way, the role of women. And like, women get to have spiritual experiences that are just as powerful and meaningful and have roles and have purpose here. And so I'd love to see if anything comes to mind to you on that idea, I guess.
No, I think you said that really well. I don't know if I have super a lot to add on, but yeah, I've always thought it was very purposeful in the plan that Christ chose Mary to manifest you, and that he chose a woman, because I think there's a lot of time that we want the easy answers. We want to give up authority, or we don't want to give up that authority, but authority is taken. Like, I think especially like historically, in the church in the time that Christ was there was, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they were seen as the authority, people should listen to. And then even in the Catholic Church and the way it was conducted to, the rulers of the day and the kings and queens, and they were seen as the authority. And I think there was a time where even like laymen weren't allowed to read the Bible. Like, they weren't printing the Bible for people, and you go to pay and have your sins forgiven. But I think the ultimate lesson that we can learn for women is that we have authority in ourselves to connect in personal ways, and that another story that I've always loved, kind of in the same vein, occurs in the Book of Mormon in Helaman 5, and I think it's trying to think of the names of the missionaries. They're imprisoned, and they have an execution set, and as they're praying, they see angels, and the prison walls crumble, and none of the people around them can see the angels these men are conversing with, but it's the people who pray to have their sins forgiven can now see the angels, and it's everyone present, and it's not just the missionaries, and it's just not the people who spent their life in prayer and scripture, and it's not just the men, but all people who turn their hearts toward Christ can have interactions with him.
That's so beautiful. And I think, as you're saying here, it kind of ties into maybe moving towards this like discussion of masculine and feminine energy, because what you were describing of like women, we have this authority and we can just claim this like inner connection. I think sometimes when people hear that, that sounds like I don't need God, or I don't need the church, or I don't need leadership, or I don't need authority. And to me, there's a misunderstanding in what is going on and why that message is so powerful. And to me, I love taking energetic frameworks and applying them to different experiences or processes and seeing like, what does this model help us better understand? And so when I'm looking at this pattern, masculine energy, getting a phone call. Masculine energy like goes on this journey where like masculine energy is already very like individual. It's very boisterous. It's very confident. It's very like focused on the self and like, here I am. And it goes through this journey of like learning to be tempered and learning to be refined through the space of like, oh, I exist to help others and to serve and to connect, and not in a derogatory way, but like that's the lesson and learning of the masculine, is how to go from a self-centered focus to like a community or collective experience focus. And
others and empathy focused.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. And so there's that journey. And I feel like that's the language and a lot of the messaging that we get a lot in church or in even just life settings in general, right? Is this sort of masculine journey. And what has been so interesting to learn is like the journey of the feminine is inverse and opposite. Masculine and feminine
Yes.
are always that
Yes.
inverse and opposite. And so the feminine starts very connected and aware of others and very much in that what's going on, I'm paying attention to these things, and has to go through this journeying process of creating a sense of self, coming to that individual connection and personal power and realizing, oh, I as an individual separate from this collective have this value. And so I think sometimes people get worried that that means, oh, this radical idea of Joseph of anyone can see God. And so we don't need anyone in between here. And I think that's also a misunderstanding that your pattern plays out really well is that, yes, Joseph was saying everyone has access to God, right? Everyone can have encounters and spiritual power. It is not limited. And you just marked out this really beautiful thing of like the role of angels and intermediaries, right? And this like introducing us to God. And I feel like that is a framework and a perspective to get into this place of, there are, whether it's us as individuals, whether that's the role of church leaders or religion in general, is to help introduce us to Christ, right? And so how well are we doing at that role? And that should be the point and the focus of what we're doing is we exist not to replace Christ, but to be that intermediary between the individual journey that somebody's going through and their encounter and understanding of who Christ is and how to become like him.
Yeah, I love it. One of the first things Christ did is he established 12 apostles. He started building a structure because that's something we can't provide for ourselves. We need a structure within to interact with the divine, or that helps us in that. There's things like I can't perform the temple ordinances by myself, but I benefit so much from them. Or there's sometimes a friend from Relief Society who says something to me that I need that I didn't know I need, and so is also needed. I had this like mind-blowing kind of epiphany the other, as I was looking at this yesterday, that Jesus came to the earth with earthly parents. He had a Mary and a Joseph, and I don't think it's any coincidence that both of these experiences are a Mary and a Joseph. I think it's kind of a symbolism that the partnership is helping him be who he is, or under our understanding of who he is and allowing him. And so it's the partnership of that feminine and that masculine. And I see kind of Mary's experience is more the feminine and like the embodied Christ. The women are the ones to kind of bring the bodies to the world and to grow the bodies and the experience of the resurrection is that there's empathy and there's forgiveness and there's interconnectedness in the way that we meet with our Savior every week. And with Joseph, it was more about that structure. It was, we are going to build something now wherein we can support. And it was about the ordinances and the doing. But that's something I would also love for you to kind of speak to as well. But
this is so fun I love this. Okay, so the first comment I'm going to say is I love what you said too about like needing that structure. And I want to like vocalize, I guess, one of the things that came to mind for me as you said that was it was helping me clarify it's not that like I can't do these things because I'm a lowly mortal or I'm a woman or I don't have this authority or I don't have whatever. It's that I genuinely think, and again, one of the reasons I love energetics is there's this pattern of like interdependability and connectedness. And so this idea is far less about we are limited in some way and more about like creating patterns or divine patterns exist for the sake that require us to need each other. And isn't that a beautiful idea, that literally we cannot fully progress on our own, that it requires, whether that's partnership, whether that's, as a human family, we need each other, whether that's, this idea that is found. I'm trying to decide. I'm going two different ways. My brain's too excited. You got me going. Thank you. I love these insights. But like, I feel like this is an example, right? Like, I had never thought to consider these things. I had never had this understanding. And yet it feels like you are one of these moments in my individual journey in life of like, oh, that conversation with Josie was just what I needed to hear. Like, I learned something meaningful from that. And I feel like that's kind of what we're trying to figure out, and why I love this idea of the patterns of partnership and the patterns of family, and how that helps us recognize that it's not just like you're stuck or you're forced into these limiting roles, but that it's actually this beautiful thing of there's an individual journey, there's a partnership level journey, there's a family level journey, there's a community level journey, and there's like a collective human journey. Those are like the different layers in energetics of like different systems that exist. And so it's cool to see how that plays out. And I think when we recognize it from this perspective of like, we're not meant to do life alone. We are not meant to grow and expand alone. That what we're able to do together is more than what we can do individually. And that balances with, we also have an important individual role to play, right? That we need to recognize our own worth and our own value and our own spot so that we can all come together and like fulfill those different pieces. It's why I love like the analogy of the body of Christ. You need the eyes and the ears and the head and the feet, and you want to, that's what makes it complete. And yet you don't want the ear doing the same job as the foot, right? They have very distinct roles, individual connections and personalities. And so seeing that idea here, I feel like is such a beautiful one of, yes, we are not just limited because we can't do this, but like there's a part of this design that we're meant to do it together. And I think that's so beautiful.
Yeah, I love it. I love the idea that we each have a connection and we're authorized to have that, but we're all also needing each other, that there isn't like one way or the other. I kind of think of the allegory of the olive tree, which it's long and tedious, but I also love all the lessons from that chapter.
Yeah.
We all are capable of producing that good fruit, and that's something we can do individually, but in that grove of trees, the root systems, we strengthen each other. And how often is one part grafted into another part when it's not doing so well? And yeah, just that need for each other and for community.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then kind of going back to your question that you were asking of like insights around this idea of, Joseph was starting to build this structure, and Christ had like started to build some sort of structure as well with like calling of these apostles and what was that work and role. And from an energetic perspective, what my mind went to is I think about the two kind of modern day missions of the church that we tend to talk about. And one of those is the gathering of Israel, and the other is the building up of Zion. And we hear a lot about the gathering of Israel recently. Like, that's been President Nelson's focus, I feel like, a lot, is like, we need to gather Israel, we got to gather Israel, we got to gather Israel. And part of that to me is the other counterpart is so that we can build Zion, right? The gathering of Israel to me and the building up of Zion play into this like masculine and feminine counterplay. And it's really interesting, even if you look at those two phrases, they sort of embody the complete journey of the masculine and the feminine that we were just talking about a minute ago. In that the gathering of Israel, gathering is a very feminine word. And yet Israel is like, I view that as the building up of the structure, right? And so that's very much the focus. That was, I feel like, kind of the role of Joseph Smith, was continuing on this work of like, we need some sort of structure, some support. And whenever I'm talking about masculine and feminine energy, I love to use the analogy of a cup, because a cup is like the structure that exists to hold the fluid inside, right? And so the water is what actually gives us life and gives like us vitality. And yet it is so much more difficult to access without some sort of structure in place to support us. And there's so much more utility that we can do when we have different types of structure in place. So a cup allows me to drink it, a hose allows me to spray it, a bucket allows me to carry it, right? Like there's so many different purposes. And so we don't want to just dismiss or discredit it, because the water actually loses some of its power. It just kind of becomes like a muddy, mucky marsh. If you think of like a riverbed, that has power that can like carve the Grand Canyon, versus like a swamp that is just kind of like there. And so this idea of like gathering Israel, I see as we're building this structure and we're going through this masculine journey of creating that structure, but doing it through this like feminine process in a way. And then building Zion, build is a very masculine word. It's very structured there. And Zion is often associated with the divine feminine in different ways. And so there's a lot of parallels between when you see Zion, that being a reference to divine feminine in different ways. And so I love seeing that relationship show up there. And I feel like if for the last 200 years from Joseph to now, it was like we needed to be working on building this structure in place, that part of the turning point that will happen going forward is we'll start doing even more to build Zion in that way. And that is that connectedness. This is where everybody gets to be a part of something and has a role to play and has a purpose. And we're like building the connections between us all individually, of learning like what's our role, what is our place, sort of like a wagon wheel that has all the different spokes and connections. If you think of Christ being like a center point, there's an infinite number of ways that we can all connect into Christ. And I feel like that's part of the conversation we're starting to explore and discover a lot more, is like there's this desire for a lot of people of like, we all need to come together. We're all important. We all roles or religions or faiths or people have a purpose or a goodness or a value to them, and trying to like bring that message. To me, that's a part of this idea of like building Zion, is recognizing we're all a part of this human family, this divine family of heavenly parents, and we're on this journey together and learning what does that look like for us collectively and individually. And to help us do that is, I feel like there's a structure or a role or a purpose that the church has in helping facilitate that. And I think we miss that second half of the picture in thinking that it's all focused on this one piece or this one area of just like, here's the church and everybody needs to be a part of the church. And I feel like it's much more of understanding the church has a role to play in being like that facilitator and bringing us to Christ. Like, to me, that's a part of why we call it the Church of Jesus Christ, or, taking on that role there. So I don't know. Lots of tangent, Emily, thoughts, but those are things I like to think of.
I really love it. And it's just like my mind's taking it in and making so many connections. Like, there is something very important within the gospel about the tangible and the non-tangible, and the masculine and the feminine, and of the gathering and the building. And even Christ himself said, we have the sacrament, we have the water, we have the bread, something that's more flowing and more structured. And I am the living water, but I'm also the bread of life. And I don't know, I feel like I need to explore that more, because I don't fully understand all the implications in this moment. But I'm like, there is something very important to that. And I love the idea that, the water is vital. The water is the means to the end in this cup and water analogy. But that water dissipates if it doesn't have what it needs to hold it in place,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and as you were talking too, it brings to mind another piece of this, is I've thought about the idea of like, ongoing revelation or ongoing restoration and continual revelation, and like the role of individuals and the role of church leaders and the role of just humanity in general. And I feel like one of the things for me has been this idea of like, whenever we're trying to truly work together in like a co-creative or cooperative way, that piece of like, we need each other, a part of that is, I don't think any one of us can fully understand or see the complete picture. It's like everybody has a bunch of puzzle pieces, and as we bring our different puzzle pieces together, we get a bigger and bigger image. And so when you have a couple, it can look like, oh, this is a tree, because we've got some green leaves that are all being connected. And when you take those collection of pieces and you put them with somebody else's, you realize like, oh, actually that was a tree, right? These leaves were the top of a tree, but we can't see that complete picture without each other. And so that's why I feel like it's so important we're working on building that individual connection with God and the divine, and we're strengthening and figuring out, what areas do I feel called to or guided to learn about or to think about or to study or to reach out to people, and then having that connection with others as well, so that we get that feedback and we get that synergy. And I feel like that's how we're going to create a lot more and move forward, is it's going to come through all the different pieces and connections there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like my individual spiritual journey has kind of been like first thinking, I don't know that the feminine is honored in this church.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I can be a part of this church, to praying about it and then feeling like maybe it is not where it needs to be, but the church is the vehicle. The church is the mode for that divine feminine to come forth, and the structure is there. And even the doctrine is there. Maybe it's not talked about as openly, but as I've listened to people like Maxine Hanks and you and different women explain, the experiences they're having around the divine feminine at church, it empowers me to keep going. And that's just kind of what I thought about as you're describing the leaves and the individual and it coming together to form the big picture. Is just there's so many parts that I can't see on my own as a whole that other people have helped me to see.
Same. Well, and I think that's why I loved that you pointed out it wasn't just Joseph and Mary were having these experiences and seeing the resurrected Christ. I loved that you recognized in the pattern too, is there was somebody introducing them to that, mm-hmm. right? And so I love and cherish those moments too of like learning from Maxine or learning from other women or like hearing your thoughts and stories. Like why I love these conversations is it's like, I know I can't have the whole experience on my own, that there's somebody brings in this piece and somebody else brings in this experience. And that just helps us all so much more. And so I love that like you're having these thoughts and you're having these experiences. And I feel like it's sometimes so easy for us to get caught up in this place of like, well, I'm not a Maxine Hanks, right? Like she has, right. And I think we do that really easy. We're trying to like categorize people like, okay, well, they're here and they're here and they're here and I'm down here. And like, my thoughts are just here. And that's why I love that imagery of like a wagon wheel is there's like a role and a space and infinite room for everyone. And everyone has a thought and a piece. And the more I connect with women and the more I reach out to them, the more I'm like, these thoughts and ideas are everywhere. Like I have not met a woman yet who has not been like, I'm having a thought, or I've had this idea, or I've had this experience, or I've had this realization. And I was like, these are all so good. Like imagine what could happen if we could bring all of those ideas together. And I feel like we're slowly starting to figure out new ways of doing that and getting confident in sharing them and starting to open up more. And that for me is what transforms it from an experience of like looking at the lack and looking at like, oh, there's so much that could be here or that isn't happening or isn't occurring. And instead be able to look at it as like, oh, look at this potential that is available here. And I almost even hesitate to use the word potential. I actually want to bring in another energetic concept, which is this idea that there is like a base energy, almost like a melody in music. And then you get to choose how that melody plays out, right? And so you can play it out as a little da 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 da, right? Or it can be a grand orchestra rendition, right? And so sometimes as we're learning and we're growing, the expression of what's possible is small and limited. And it can feel just like the basic notes being tinkered out, right? And when you can see the potential of like, I've heard an orchestra before, and you compare that to like a little 5-year-old just starting to play the piano, it's like, oh, this is nothing in comparison, right? Like, this is not music I want to sit and listen to. This is not something that moves me or inspires me. And yet, that's a level of expression. That's a level of practice. That's how you get to being able to have those bigger experiences. And so, for me, when I've struggled in different areas of, knowing like how do you stay, I guess, is the question most people ask or think about. For me, it's so easy when I'm in that mindset and in that space of, oh, we're expressing, oh, we're growing. And I get to have that same enthusiasm that I feel when I watch my kids do something new, right? I'm not shaming them and being like, oh, you're doing this terrible or you're doing this wrong. And I feel like that's a similar perspective that our heavenly parents have on us, is like, oh, that's cute that you guys think that that's what's going on. Like, keep practicing, keep working, you'll figure this out. Like, it's okay, things are going well. And when I tap into that space, instead of it being this like battle or this thing I have to fix or this big like thing that has to be overcome, it gets to turn into this experience of like, oh, we get to explore this together. We get to discover this together. We get to journey in this. And whether it's my parenting, whether it's my relationship with my husband, like anytime I get into that, I got to fix this or there's a problem here, like it just gets heavy really fast and hard. But when I can get into that space of like, we're learning something new. And like my husband and I have even gotten into this space of like, we had a really big fight on something and we're like, yep, that was the first time we've ever done that. And so, yeah, it was going to be hard and it was going to be bad, but we're going to get better at this, And so it's not always going to be like that. And I feel like the more we have that mindset, the more progress becomes available to us and we can actually shift easier rather than we're stuck in like everything is good or everything is a problem. I feel like we sometimes get stuck there.
Yes, absolutely. And I think either we have to be really happy with everything. Like, I don't know, we're so used to black and white. It's like we either have to be really happy with everything in the church or we're, we're kind of, we're not being faithful to it if we're not. But, and I think I saw that kind of tug of war in myself as I started to feel these tensions, and certain things would bring up anger, but then I would really judge that anger.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, wow, I can't feel the spirit when I'm angry like that, Josie. You really need to let this go. And kind of in hindsight, I'm kind of giving honor to Josie that, like, you know what, you were hurting because you were like, what was happening is my divine self, I was repressing because of certain beliefs I had, because of the structure that I had been received in my whole life. And there was a little anger that, I wasn't showing my true self. And I think that's okay. But what has really helped me to move on from that is to be like, that's not my responsibility to change it. It's not in my power. But what I do have power with is to continue to have these connections with Jesus Christ and with the Spirit and with things that I read. And I can continue to have connections with other people who are also growing and in this together, because I feel like it's something really powerful that I believe there is like a universal conscious move toward the divine feminine. The Heavenly Mother is manifesting herself to women on an individual basis, and then those women are coming together. And it's like in this space, I can be part of that movement up, and I can be part of changes should they occur. And there's something really empowering in that. That if I walked away, I might not be able to take part in as fully as being here.
Yeah.
And being able to help women in the ward, whether or not, wherever wherever they are in their journey, or whether or not they love the priesthood as it is, just being able to be a support to other women is part of that building up of the divine feminine.
Yeah. Oh, so well said. And I think like what you said, this journey of not getting stuck in the black and white thinking of, again, I look at those like energetic levels. So like on an individual level, I'm all good or I'm all bad, right? Like, I shouldn't be doing this because that's bad. And it's like, I have to excise out the bad parts of me, right? And it's like, no, I have this human part of me and I have this divine part of me, and they're learning how to coexist together. And that's a part of that journey and a part of that process. And same thing with like, again, I'm always looking at different patterns. So in my marriage, that's another level of things where it's like, I went through times where like I would suppress different things, or like, I'm not going to bring that up because I don't want to have contention or different things. And it's like, no, that is a necessary part of the process. It what allows you to thrive and grow closer and grow in these different areas. And so there's a need for that. And that anger, that hurt, that grief, like it has a divine purpose, and we should recognize it, and we should know what it means and understand how to continue to move out of it, right? My marriage would not survive if I was always in an angsty, mad, angry place, right? Or if my husband was. But if we also ignored that, then it loses the authenticity that can show up in our relationship, or the realness or the growth that can happen, right? And so then applying that to like a system level experience, right? The church is all good or all bad. And it's like, no, there are these roles that have to play in it. And we're learning, I feel like, how to balance these on that individual level and beyond. So,
Yep, absolutely.
So good. And then everything you said there with women, like, yes, I feel so passionately the same way that there's just, it's a beautiful time to be alive in a way, and exciting to get to have these connections. And I feel like when we tap into that experience, then there's so much more potential that opens up, because again, I don't feel like the feminine, again, going back to kind of the journey of the masculine and the feminine, the reveal of the feminine is not a battle to be won. Like, it is a joy to experience, or to relish, and to come into, and to connect with and experience. And I think we're learning more and more, how do we do that on an individual level and with each other? So that's awesome. Yeah. I could talk with you all day. Do you have any other thoughts though you want to share here before we wrap up? Like,
no, I just hope everyone has a happy Easter. I love that the church is kind of on this path to make it a bigger holiday, because it's just as important as the birth of Christ, if not more so. So I think this is great. I hope we all just really are able to cherish the spirituality of this holiday.
I love it.
A great weekend.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving us such a beautiful new perspective. And anyone who joined us later, make sure you go back and listen to Josie's beautiful introduction to the parallels between Mary Magdalene and Christ in the tomb and Joseph Smith in the grove. Like, this is going to be my new favorite Easter connection. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Emily. I'm really, really glad to have been able to talk with you this morning.
Awesome.
It's been great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Everyone have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll talk to you later. Bye. All right.